I truly was. I didn't have this mask on, trying to fit in with the kids, with getting high, and the mask of hiding my anxiety and all the stuff that scared me. We were talking about this, and I think she said something like, well, if you didn't have trauma, would you have gotten high? I was like, I don't know. I don't know. But
why didn't I hear it make the sound? Did you hear it make a sound?
It never makes a sound for me.
It goes beep, 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 bling. That's what it makes. That's the sound.
I've never heard that before.
It should have the sound. It doesn't matter. Welcome back to Dopey. This is the host of the Adversity Advantage, author of many a book. Why don't you rattle off your book titles real quick?
Davey boy, good to see you. My books are From Felony to Fitness to Free, Faith, Family, Fitness, and The Heart of Recovery.
So 2 books, all F's, and then The Heart of Recovery.
Yeah, I couldn't find alliteration for The Heart of Recovery.
Recovery really rocks.
That could be true.
Anyway, welcome back, Doug Bopst. It's always good to see you. We have a lot to talk about. Doug is a YouTube sensation. He recently broke 100,000 subscribers on his YouTube channel. He's always trying to school me up. He said, Dave, I have a concept and I think it'd be good for you. I have this video I did about weed and how kicking weed has impacted my life so positively. The YouTubers love it. I think it could be good for you and Dopey, and I'm always grateful for Doug's insights and suggestions. So what do you think, Doug? You think this is a good plan?
I do, because I think your audience will appreciate my nuanced opinion on it. Like, I don't speak in absolute terms. Like, I've shared that quitting weed and not smoking weed and all that stuff definitely has saved my life and impacted me because of where it led me when I was a kid. But hey, like, you gotta, if you're doing something that works for you and it's legal and you're not like hurting yourself or others, like, who am I to say what you should or shouldn't do?
Well, you're fitness influencer, Doug Bopst. That's who you are. Now, let me ask you, how much did you love weed prior to this newfound feeling about the whole thing?
I mean, as a teenager, I loved weed, but I loved it for reasons I didn't think I would like it for. I thought that I would really enjoy getting high because it was part of the cool thing to do. You rip bong hits, you smoke blunts, you listen to music. It was like the thing, right? And it was like some of my favorite hip hop artists talked about it. It's like a lot of the people that I looked up to were smoking a lot of weed. I saw these kids that were getting the girls and having fun. I was like, oh, if I start to insert myself in that lifestyle, I'll feel better about myself. But what happened was when I first started smoking weed, all of my problems seemed to go away and disappear. And that's what became like addicting for me. It was like, oh, I have this crutch to numb all of my anxiety, to numb all of my self-esteem issues, to numb all of the negative thoughts I had about myself. And that became something that I really loved for a long time. And it worked until it didn't.
What about the stoner identity in general? Did you love that?
I did. And that was probably the hardest thing to break free from, because I don't know if you can relate to this. I know you loved weed a lot too. Like, you develop this identity like, oh, like, I'm going to be like these rock stars or these hip hop artists. Or I'm going to be the guy we just get high all day. We just chill. We like talk about dumb stuff. We eat like fast food, and that's like a fun thing, right? And then I think, again, for a lot of my friends, they had no issue with it. But for a guy like me that had massive self-esteem issues and didn't like myself, it became this massive slippery slope down the road where it got to a point where I was so unhappy with myself and so unhappy with my life that I developed like massive paranoia, which I think I didn't realize it's more common than I thought it was back then. Like, a small percentage of people will actually get paranoid from smoking weed. And I started to get massive panic attacks whenever I got high. So much so, and you'll laugh at this, that I would be driving my own car and we'd be like passing around like a blunt or something. And I would have an anxiety attack and I'd have to pull over and let my friends drive for me because I was so panicky. And of course, like, naturally, I get made fun of for that, which, again, I don't blame my friends back then, because it's I guess, what kids do. And they're probably like, why is this kid freaking out over weed?
Well,
right.
I can very much relate. I'm still so anxious that if I'm with friends, I'll just have them drive and I'm not
Really?
smoking weed.
Really?
Like, and yeah, I mean, like, I'm not the greatest driver. And in my heyday of smoking, Like, I'm not, if I'm behind the wheel and we're smoking, it's a problem. Like, I should not be behind the wheel, and not because we're smoking, but because I'm such a bad driver. Like, I'm not a great driver sober. The other day I was taking my kid to the beach, and we come up on this, it's basically, we come up to this two-way like main street that's pretty bustling, and we have to go through that, but there's no stop sign, there's no light. You have to go through kind of oncoming traffic, and there was a Subway on the other, not like a Subway station, but a Subway sandwich shop
Yeah,
on
yeah,
the other side of this intersection. We were going to get Subway sandwiches, and I'm like not patient.
yeah.
Like, I'm not patient at the right moment, and I start going through the intersection, and I didn't see another car was coming, and he almost fucking smashed into me and my daughter. Totally my fault. I had to say, my fault, my fault. And my daughter's like, Daddy, was that your fault? And I said, yes, that was Daddy's fault. But my point is, I have anxiety no matter what. I would never laugh at anybody who is stoned and can't drive. Also, though, my hero when I was a kid, I mean, I was just so laced with neuroses and anxiety my whole life that when I first discovered weed, I was like, this is the oasis that I've always wanted. This is the me that I always wanted to be. Like, I think my hero, this is just where and I also think I'm still a stoner. Like, I'm a sober stoner. Like, I'm still like I don't eat that much fast food, but I do love being stony in general. People
Right.
look at me and think I look high all the time, and I haven't been high in a long time. But like, my stoner hero was like Shaggy from Scooby Doo. Like, I wish I had been that when I started smoking weed.
I
And
thought
that
you were,
shouldn't be anybody's hero.
I thought you were going to say Jimi Hendrix because of the whole Purple Haze thing.
Well, Jimi Hendrix, listen, that's a high bar. Jimi Hendrix is probably the greatest guitar player to ever play. I think it's too high of a bar. I didn't put my heights were on like loser stoners like Shaggy, who talks to a dog and overeats as much as he can and is not useful in solving the mystery.
Yeah. I mean, and it's interesting we talk about like the identity of a stoner and like how addicting that can become because that's the reason I started to do opiates. I don't know if I shared this the last time I was on your show, but where I talked about my story. I was so addicted to the community of people that I had built that I got high with that once I started having these panic attacks, I felt ashamed because I was like, why can't I do the same thing that all of my friends and I have been doing for years without like I went to the ER like one time for having or a couple times, but the first time was I had a massive panic attack when I was high. And I thought I was literally dying, but it was my paranoia and my like anxiety got so bad that I literally went to the hospital to make sure I wasn't having a heart attack. And you would think like after that moment that I would stop smoking weed, I would give it all up and just try to find new friends. But I was so addicted to the lifestyle that we've been talking about that I had to find a way to stay involved with that without having these anxiety attacks. And then one of my friends ended up offering me a 5 milligram Percocet. And then I was able to actually smoke weed and get high without having a panic attack when I was high on opiates. So that was actually so the reason I say that quitting weed saved my life is because of that. Because when I was smoking weed and I was getting the paranoia and I was addicted to the lifestyle, it nearly cost me my life because of my heavy addiction to opiates.
Right. I'm surprised that the doctor didn't just prescribe you benzos when you went in with panic
Well, he
attacks.
did, and I ended up just not taking them because I didn't feel. I don't know. I guess I just didn't think they were like a hardcore drug. Like I thought because it was prescribed to me as Klonopin, which is what it was. I didn't think it was like worthy enough of me taking. I mean, so I ended up just, you know, resorting to painkillers, and I in a way was like, oh well, painkillers are legal, so I'm sure they're safe, right?
It's interesting that you went to the opiates and not to the benzos. I went to opiates before benzos also, but I wasn't exposed to benzos in a way that it seemed like an accessible drug.
Hmm.
For me it was like I'm stoner, stoner, stoner. Then there's kind of coke around,
Yeah.
like social coke, and I'm like, I never liked social coke. It always fueled my anxiety. It always made me feel more high strung. And then heroin showed up with coke. Like, I lived in New York, and it was all drug delivery services, and they would deliver coke and they would have heroin. They might
Right.
have had benzos too, but I wasn't plugged in to benzos. Every time I took a benzo though, every time I took a benzo, I was like, this is how I'm supposed to feel all the time. Because I'm like, I am naturally neurotic, and I'm naturally panicky.
Right.
But still, I didn't seek them out. I wound up becoming a heroin addict, like becoming such a heroin addict that I had my heroin dealer living with me. And when I had my heroin dealer living with me, one of his customers showed up at my apartment, and he was heavy benzo guy.
Interesting.
And he was an amazing guy. Actually, he was a printmaking professor at Brooklyn College. He was probably 70 years old, and he came to my apartment on 24th Street, and I was probably 25, and I had a bag of old cameras that my cousin had given me years ago, and I was a photographer. I was like a photo major in college, a photo major and art history major in college. And this old man comes to my apartment, and he sees this old army bag of metal body cameras, these old Minolta cameras. And he goes, I'll give you 1,000 Clonopins for this bag of cameras. I said, great. You know, and he came the next day, and he gave me, or maybe that day, he gave me all these bottles of Clonopin because he was on like all this government subsidized medication shit. He had like bottles and bottles and bottles of benzos, and he was a heroin addict and he was an alcoholic. And then I started taking benzos every day. But I want to get into your five. What is it? Five which?
5 gifts. There's a lot of gifts that I think came from quitting weed, and I can't remember exactly the 5 I listed in my video on YouTube. I mean, I remember a couple of them, I think, but there's so many. I mean, I actually want to do another video, but I'm happy to get in.
Five more gifts?
Yeah, I'm happy to get into the gifts on the show, and I think a lot of the gifts are. It's not like something just came to me. It's like I didn't get, why my life inevitably didn't get worse, after I quit. You know what I mean?
Okay, I like it. I mean, for me, I've talked about it a lot. Weed was the final frontier for me. I could not get sober because I could not let go of weed. That was my thing. I was a heroin addict. I was a benzo addict, but I couldn't be done with those until I was done with weed. And I want to get into what 5 gifts do you have on tap? What do you, if you remember, do you go from best gift to worst, or worst to best?
Um, I mean, the ones that are on the top of my mind right now, because like I said, there's so many. The first one is like my lifestyle completely changed. Like when I was smoking a lot of weed, all my friends and I would do, like I was referencing a few minutes ago, was like kind of sit around on the couch, ripping bong hits, smoking blunts, eating a bunch of fast food, which I mean, I guess can be fun for a period of time. But then if you do that long enough, you become massively unhealthy. And so when I stopped smoking, when I got into recovery, um, I changed my habits. I started to eat better. I started to work out, as we all well know. And what I became interested in very much evolved to where I wasn't interested in just sitting on the couch all day. I became more motivated to do things to better myself and to help other people.
Can you talk about, like, I know that when I gave up weed, I was terrified of giving up weed. I was terrified of not having fun. I was terrified of not being myself. I was terrified of not being relaxed. It seems like a long journey from stoner to fit person.
Yeah. Well, I had the benefit of going to jail, which allowed me to face all of my demons head on, because you're right. I was like you. I was like, I couldn't go to a sporting event. I couldn't go to like the aquarium. I couldn't go to a family dinner without being stoned. So
I
I
think
had
it's
this.
interesting that you mentioned aquariums. Like,
I,
are
I
you are
like
you
the.
a big are
I
you a
like the.
big aquarium guy?
I love the ocean. I love the water, and I think the marine life like fascinates me. But you're right. Like once you take that away, now you have to deal with the real version of yourself in the most raw way possible. And thankfully, my cellmate, as I've talked about before, and I'll keep this part short just because I know we've already covered it.
No, no, no. This is for the whole new YouTube audience. Feel
Yeah.
free. I want to
Yeah.
hear the best of the story.
For a lot of my life living leading up to my incarceration, I was justifying my drug use and my behavior based on my past experiences. And I was saying, well, I can continue to get high and do what I want because my parents got divorced and people will feel sorry for me. Or I can continue to do what I want because I was bullied in school and picked on and people will feel sorry for me. Or I can do what I want because, I loved sports and I just wasn't naturally a gifted athlete like my friends were, so people feel sorry for me. And what my cellmate got me to do was realize that I didn't take any responsibility for my actions whatsoever. Like my circumstances were, I guess, were bad, but I still chose to behave in a certain way. And that inspired me to take this fitness approach, which I was totally unconfident with. I was totally talk about like being afraid to be looked at. My biggest fear growing up was what people thought of me. So that's why I did whatever I could to fit in so that I could get people to like me. And when I got down to do my first push up in jail, my thoughts were, oh my gosh, I know that I'm fat and out of shape and that everybody's going to laugh at me when I can't do a push up. And what happened when I went down to do a push up really surprised me because I went down and I couldn't do a push up. I couldn't do one for my knees, but nobody was laughing at me. They were just kind of looking like, okay, cool. This guy's like trying to get his life together. And I think we're so concerned with what other people think that it robs us at times from making that change because most people don't care. You know what I mean? Most people are just trying to better themselves. They're not worried about you, but our own ego is trying to like keep us safe and being like, all right, like you got to be careful because other people are going to judge you. And I could also barely walk up and down the steps because I had been smoking a bunch of weed. I was also smoking a pack or a pack and a half of cigarettes or something like that before I went to jail as well. And so my cellmate agreed to train me in there during my 90-day sentence. And I was able to do a set of 10 push ups and run a mile by the time my sentence was over. And what that did for me is it allowed me to reattach behavior to emotion. Because, like I said before, and like you kind of hinted at, it's like when you're smoking weed all the time, you're so anxious and stressed and uncomfortable to be around other people to do things without being high that I had to relearn how to like live life without those emotions and how to deal with it in a healthier way. And fitness gave me that. And the one story that was really pivotal in my incarceration, other than the talk where my cellmate told me to stop being a victim and to stop blaming people for my problems, was my dad came to visit me in jail, and I had just started to work out at this point. I think for a few weeks or something, but it was always my cellmate like dragging me out, being like, "All right, time to work out, time to do your push-ups." And at the beginning, people were like, Doug, you have to tap into your anger and your negative emotions and think about that when you're working out because that'll be a great way to push through. And I never understood the value of that until my dad came to visit me and he started screaming at me in the visitor center and was like, "You're going to rehab, you're this, you're that." And I'm like, "Dad, like F rehab. Like I found fitness, I'm going to be good." And he just kept yelling at me. And my dad was always a yeller growing up. So I just said, "Dad, like how much worse do you want my life to get? I'm in jail right now. Like what else do you want from me?" I hung up the phone, walked back into the common area of the jail where I was. And I said to my cellmate, I was like, "Hey, let's work out. I'm pissed off." And that a switch flipped where I was like, okay, like when I'm stressed or I'm angry, I have something else that maybe it doesn't give me the same instant gratification that weed or drugs did, but it's something else I can pour myself into. And then you like get through that wave of emotion. You're like, oh, like I actually feel better.
There's a couple of things that I'm really that when I'm listening to you that triggers my thinking, and the first one is it's like you're in a situation where there's nothing. It's like almost a bottom,
For
right? You're
sure.
in jail. You can't do a push up. You can't go up a flight of steps. You also can't really get weed. You can't get McDonald's. You have nothing but your misery, which was a real great opportunity. First of all, so when you are at a bottom, everybody talks about it. You have an amazing opportunity to change something. So that's the first thing that makes me think. The second thing is your cellmate. Not only did you have a friendship with him, you gave him a purpose. Him agreeing to train you gave you a purpose. And then all of a sudden, you have something to do. This is an amazing sort of like equation for life changing shit. A bottom, an opportunity, and a friend. Like, it's like that's a lot of good shit right there. You have a bottom, you have an opportunity, and you have a friend who wants to help you. And then all of a sudden, you get motivation because you have nothing else to do anyway. And I love your story, and it's also very powerful. I talk to you all the time. I forget how powerful your story actually is, with all the making fun of you and all that stuff. I forget about your story is very powerful. You really did have a really really sincere transformation, and it's pretty amazing. But I'm more curious because our audience isn't really in jail, and the
Right.
ones that are at their bottom, and I'm not saying your story isn't relevant because I think it is, and
For sure.
I think it's super inspiring. I'm like 50 years old, out of shape. I can do push-ups. I can do 50 in a clip, you know what I mean? But I'm not happy with where I am physically, and I guess it's not for me. Let's go to somebody else, like who is on the fence. And I like you, I do not. If someone's out there smoking weed and they're a junkie and they're smoking weed and their life is better, or taking anything, I'm not going to say you're doing it wrong. But let's say somebody's on the fence and they're smoking weed and they're a drug addict or an alcoholic and they're like, this is all I can do. What can you do, or what can anyone do to motivate them? Like, where do they find some way to activate their own bottom, activate their own desperation, and like what kind of shortcut can you offer?
Well, the second like gift that comes to mind from the quitting weed that'll like relate to this question is it gave me a reason to believe in myself again. Because when I was getting high all the time, I knew what I was, despite how much I enjoyed parts of the lifestyle, I knew what I was doing wasn't in my best interest. I knew it made me more anxious. I knew I was hanging out with people that I shouldn't have hung out with. I knew that I was bouncing around from job to job, which made me feel super ashamed of myself. And you're right, like not everybody has the good fortune of going to jail as I did. And it's kind of, I know it sounds kind of weird for me to say that, but I did. I had this, I was insulated, and I was isolated, and I had this guy that thankfully came into my life to help me. That said, when I left and then the gloves kind of came off, the training wheels came off, I was scared because I was like, my track record up until this point has proven that I'm a failure with giving up drugs. And the way that I convinced myself, and I think the audience may relate to this, to believe in myself enough to give up weed and everything else I was doing, was I was like, all right, if I focus, if I ask myself, what do I want my life to look like in the next year, 2 years, 3 years? Like who's the person that Doug Bopst wants to become? Like, how do I change my identity? And I know for me, I wanted to be the guy that had self-confidence. I wanted to be the guy that was proud of myself. I wanted to be the guy that was fit and successful. And I know a lot of that sounds, externally motivated, but that's the person that I wanted to become. And I said to myself, I'm like, okay, what can I do every single day that will at least give me an opportunity to get closer to that person? So I asked myself, okay, like, who do I want to be? I know that if I smoke weed every day, I'm not going to become that person based on where it led me before. So I said, okay, I'm not going to focus on, you know, what my life's going to look like in 2 years. I'm going to say, okay, I have an idea of who I want to become. And then what can I do every single day to go all in to better myself? And then once I did that, I said to myself, all right, I'm going to work out. I'm going to change the way I eat. I'm not going to do drugs. I'm going to stay away from certain people. And then I would do that for a day. And I'm like, okay, great. I did that for a day. I feel better about myself because I actually proved to myself that I could live without weed without being in jail for a day. Then I just compounded that every single day. And then you look back and like 2 weeks go by and it's like, oh crap. Like I've actually improved myself by not doing these things, and my life is better. And it came from these small steps. And I think that's the only way to me, is like you have to ask yourself hard questions and like, am I really happy with myself? Who do I want to become? And then what are the daily things you got to do? Because if you're like, I want to get sober, I want to give up weed, Like, what does that look like? Like, how are you going to do that? Because you're going to, like we've talked about, you're going to have to face the music at some point where you're like, all right, I'm uncomfortable right now. I don't feel good about myself. And now I'm stepping back into my old friends, and they're going to try and tempt me to get high. I'm going to walk into a family event. I'm nervous about being around my family. They're going to tempt me. So you have to do things to like guard yourself. I think you talked about these, on my show when you came on. You talked about these barriers or something, that these guardrails in recovery that you put up to kind of help you.
I think I described them as force fields.
Yeah. And I think a force field for that is, what are you going to do to rebuild your self-esteem and self-confidence on a daily basis so that you can stand up for yourself when your friends or people around you are like, hey, just smoke a little bit, and you don't want to. Like, and fitness and sticking to the promises you make to yourself, and doing things that you know are in line with who you want to become, I think are all ways to do that.
Yeah, definitely. For me, I didn't, by the time I was done smoking weed, I mean, I smoked pot with like basically whoever came to my house,
Right.
but I was the instigator. I didn't have anybody being like, smoke with me. It was me, 100. Maybe I had one guy, Lenny, who was a waiter at Katz's. And he would come over every day and smoke pot with me and listen to Nas and Biggie Smalls and
Let's
make
go.
bets and not talk to me. But yeah, I loved getting high with Lenny. Lenny's a Dominican guy from Brooklyn. He waited tables with me forever. He would come back to my apartment. I lived like 10 minutes away from Katz's, and we would take bong hits. And then I would make Lenny sing songs with me. I would like bust out the acoustic guitar and find a song that he would like. And one of the songs we always did was that song Tonight.
We were
Yeah,
young.
yeah, and to have Lenny do that song with me when he would never have done that was a great stoner moment in my life. But when I think about quitting weed, because it's funny, I talked to you about quitting weed, like how did you do it? Like I didn't do it also, and I did do it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And when I stopped, it was like I loved getting high. I loved the identity. I wouldn't get, and by the end of it, I wasn't getting high in the morning. I would go to work in the morning, and I
Right.
wouldn't get high until I got home from work, and I would probably smoke 3 bong hits, right, and I'd get wasted, and and then I would do nothing. I would sit on the couch and I would watch TV, and which wasn't the worst place to be. And I wasn't eating garbage. I was like cooking great food, and I was enjoying that bubble of existence. But what occurred to me was that nothing else was going to come.
Right.
That's all that I could get out of that life. And I mean, I also wound up again relapsing on benzos and Percocets and having an issue around Mike. I had a kid that I wasn't with, and all of that shit was like, oh my God, it is not tenable to smoke weed and have the life that I want. But the fear was that without weed, I would not be comfortable. I would not be myself. I would be a ball of nerves. And I would imagine that stoners out there who are watching or thinking about this would probably have fear of, because like for me, weed was like a blanket. Weed was like my hoodie. Weed was, you talk about your friends that make you want to smoke or whatever. Weed was my friend. Weed was like my best friend, and it was me and weed, and like I had a relationship with it and myself that was very strong and it wasn't an identity. It took years. I remember a few years ago I would go to the meeting and I would totally talk about weed culture at AA meetings, and people were like looking at me like, what the fuck are you talking about? But that's how connected I was to it. And I think for me, I needed like sober people. I needed a program, and my program certainly wasn't built around overcoming stonerdom.
Hmm.
And I feel like your program might have been more equipped to specifically deal with giving up stonerdom.
Yeah, I mean, I think what you said about it being a blanket and it being part of your identity, and it like making you, I guess, you feel like yourself, I guess, with it, right? I mean,
100%.
I mean, I think when you have to use a substance to feel that way, I think that's a problem. And I know that's a hard truth for people to hear, but the reality is if you're constantly having to chase after a crutch in your life to feel good about yourself, I mean, eventually for a lot of people, it's going to lead to a really dark time. So I think if the goal for anyone is, and I think one of the main goals, at least from people that I've talked to over the years, is they want to be able to feel comfortable with who they are. They want to be liked for who they are. They want to be able to feel authentic and act in integrity and, live a life of meaning and purpose. I think a good first step to do that is to take away the substances that are making you live an inauthentic life by masking who you really are. You know what I mean? And I think once you do that, it's not as simple as, I'm going to quit weed. I'm going to go to a few meetings, or I'm going to, join some sort of support group or go to treatment. My life's going to get better. It's like, no, you have to. And I love how you use the force field things, because I think that's one of the biggest mistakes people make in recovery is that they don't figure out healthier ways to deal with life, right? Like I think you've used this podcast and helping other people and being a dad and being a good partner and all these things to help give you meaning and purpose in life for when stuff is bad, right? And when you're not feeling good about yourself. Like, and it's allowed you to not go back to using some of the substances that made you feel really good about yourself when they did. And I think people have to find those things for them. For me, it's been fitness, it's been community, it's been my podcast, it's been
Writing.
spirituality. But I think you have to find what works for you.
Yeah, yesterday I interviewed this woman, and I should connect you with her because like her story is amazing. And she's this very successful baker in New York City, and she owns three bakeries, and she has this she was at DopeyCon last year. Well, she wasn't there, but she donated cookies to DopeyCon, and the
Ooh,
cookies she made were, I don't know if you were eating cookies when you were at DopeyCon last
I
year.
love cookies, so probably.
She made pie crust cookies, and they
Wow.
were fucking amazing. And her story is obviously exactly what you just said. What, and I say this to anybody who's struggling in recovery, what are you doing that you like? I didn't expect Dopey to come along. Before Dopey, I was playing music. I was always looking for something to take my interest because I need to be occupied, and I don't think I'm alone in that. Like you needed to be occupied. If you meet anybody who's sober, anybody who's had an amazing or a major life change, they find something that, I mean, gives them a life worth living, whatever it might be. And I think another thing that you just said that really resonates with me is like diversification in your life. Like, it's like another thing. It's a cliche that you hear at meetings. You can't make your partner your higher power, but you
Right.
also can't make your podcast your higher power or your body your higher power. It needs to be diversified so that you don't get bored. You have something else to do. You have multiple things that give you a feeling of who you are. That was the thing she said at the end of the interview, how comfortable she was with herself. And she was really, really amazing. And I was listening to an interview that Trey Anastasio did with Mark Maron recently. And at the end of the interview, he said that they were talking about like virtuoso guitar players.
Hmm.
And Trey said there was a Miles Davis quote that really affected him, which was, the hardest thing to do is to figure out what you sound like, how to
Right.
play like yourself and not to play like somebody else, which is exactly what you were just talking about.
Yeah. I mean, getting sober, getting into recovery reminds me of this song by the Foo Fighters, like Times Like These. And it's like, again, if I butcher the chorus, I'm going to sound really stupid with this analogy. But I think it
Yes.
goes, it's time like these you learn to live again. It's times like these you learn to love again, or something like that. Right. And I think when, am I right?
I don't like the food. You're such a cheeseball. Give me a
But
break.
anyway, I mean, so like, hear me out. So if that chorus is true, which I think it is,
It's times like these we learn to live again. Yeah, I think you got the lyrics right. You're Googling the lyrics right now.
No, I'm not.
What are you looking at? Texts?
No, a phone call was coming through, and I just declined it.
Your dating app? What are you looking at?
No, a phone call came through, and I declined the
I
call.
swear to God, I'm on the phone with Doug and I hear when his voice is scrolling. He's on the phone and then all of a sudden I feel his brain scrolling.
I was just about to make a really good point.
Okay, the phone rang. What was your point?
So my point was, like, you brought up the Trey Anastasio thing where he talks about like playing like to your tune, like playing your song, right? And I think that when you get into recovery and you get rid of all the stuff that was masking who you truly are and how you truly feel and what you truly want, you begin to like ask yourself some certain questions. You begin to find that song for you and what you truly like. You know, you learn to live for who you are again. You learn to, in some ways, like yourself again. You learn to figure out like what you want in your life. And like for you, like, and this is a roadblock that a lot of people have, is like you start the show with Chris dies. You could have easily been like, you know what? I'm shutting down Dopey. I know that went through your head, and I'm gonna just go back and I'm gonna go be a drug addict for the rest of my life. And you probably could have found a way to rationalize that in your mind, right? You could have been like, I got sober, started this amazing thing. My co-host overdoses on fentanyl and dies of a fentanyl overdose, and then that's why my life is like this. But no, you found, as hard as it was, you found purpose in that. And you're like, you know what? Like, I'm going to keep doing this, you know, in spite of the misery that, you know, moment caused for you. And that's become a big part of your purpose and what you do now. You know what I mean? And a lot of people don't see it like that.
Well, I've always been one to pursue my pleasure. Like my pleasure has always, like I'm a hedonist. I always want to feel good. I
Right.
always want to feel better. I always want this pleasure. And it was so dopey, so pleasurable to me. It's such a pleasure to make the show. It's so fun to put something out. It's so cool to get music or art and put it all together and have this thing that I refused to give that up when Chris died. And as for relapsing, like everybody said that to me, like they were worried that I was going to relapse when Chris died, and like that was the furthest thing
Right.
from my consciousness. But also, when Chris died, I was 43 years old, and I had two children. You know, using was not in my consciousness. It was, and quitting wasn't either. Quitting, using or quitting, neither were in my consciousness. It was more like fear that it wouldn't be good anymore. That was in my consciousness. Fear that I wouldn't be able to pull it off. Fear that it would suck. Fear that people wouldn't like me, like you were saying. But the scary or weird thing is that today is the anniversary of Chris's death. Today's
wow.
the 6th anniversary.
Oh man, it's crazy.
It is. It is. And yesterday was the first anniversary. There was a guy who listened to the show named Brian Connolly, and he called himself Hot Wheels. And he very famously, in the dopey world, he very famously was this horrible drug addict, alcoholic, and he loved Jackass. And he would get wasted, and somebody dared him to jump into a frozen pond. And he said, okay. He goes, give me $20 and I'll do it. And the guy's like, all right. And Brian didn't have to do this, but for some reason he decided to go head first. And the pond was too frozen. He thought he would break through and get into the water, but it didn't break. And
Wow.
instead he broke his neck and he became a quadriplegic. And he was in and out of recovery. He was an early Dopey listener, early Dopey Nation person. He ran Dopey Zooms. And he died a year ago yesterday.
Wow.
And it's just a lot of death and a lot of life in what we do. You know what I mean? Because what we're trying to do is enjoy what we're doing, hopefully help somebody, and stay well ourselves. But not everybody gets to do it, right?
No, and I think that, you know, people think that they have to do something publicly like you and I do to have meaning and purpose in their life, that they have to like impact people from a broad stage sometimes when they hear that word purpose. But when I hear about like the word meaning and purpose, it's like what I think about is like, am I like living life with in integrity? Am I like actually contributing positively to my life and the life of other people. And that could be one person, that could be a million, right? And I think the biggest, one of the other big gifts that came from me quitting weed was, like we just kind of just spent a few minutes talking about, was it gave me the ability to reconnect to myself and who I truly was. I didn't have this mask on of trying to fit in with the kids, with getting high. I had the mask of hiding my anxiety and all the stuff that scared me. Like, I learned about myself a lot. And that, I mean, obviously became a big catalyst for what I do now. But I think for people that are listening to this or watching this, and they're like, okay, like, how do I find meaning in my life? And I think the big, one of the big things you got to do is you got to take away the crutch, and just for a period of time, and just say, okay, like, what do I want in my life? Does this fit with where I want to go? Like, who do I want to become? Am I living a life of integrity? Am I happy, like truly happy? Because you can think you're happy with getting high until you're not, right? And then once you get rid of it, then it's like, oh, like, I really wasn't that happy. You know, I've damaged some relationships. I've limited myself in certain areas of my life. I'm not healthy. I don't know who I am anymore. And for me, you know, it became a gateway. It was definitely a gateway drug for me. I mean, I know there's a lot of controversy around that, but for me, the reason it was because it taught me that I had to use a substance to deal with my life. And it's like
And weed is one that you can do every day, which is
yeah.
that's the weird thing about the real gateway phenomenon of weed. And I want to talk about, like, why do you think why is it controversial in itself?
Well, I don't know if is it Maya Salovitz? Am I pronouncing her name right? I know you know
Solivets.
Salovitz.
Yeah, yeah.
I think I had a conversation with her back in the day, and we were talking about this, and I think she said something like, "Well, if you didn't have trauma, would you have gotten high?" And I was like, I don't know. You know, I don't know. But that said,
What was
because
her? Why was she asking that question?
I think she was pushing back on the narrative that it was a gateway drug. I think she was maybe trying to say that there was maybe gateway trauma. I forget what I mean. If Maya listens to this, forgive me for butchering our
She's
conversation.
not. She's not going to listen to this.
Um, but we were on the phone talking about this, and but I think there's pushback because people don't think that weed's that bad of a drug. I think that it's something that people think that you can use every single day, even though, like, now from what I've learned from, I did this like 8-part cannabis series, the THC content in today's weed is like way higher than it used to be. It's causing a psychosis in a certain population of people. Like, it's way more dangerous, and from what I've learned, than it was back in the day, right? But I also think that people there's a lot of people that can smoke weed recreationally and they don't go on to do harder drugs. So I think the conversation, in my opinion, revolves around, okay, like, we can't make these blanket statements either, right? Because what happens is then you get a guy like me who had a bunch of trauma, was unhappy with myself, hated who I was trying to fit in with other people. I was like, oh, I'm going to use weed because it's not that bad. And then I found out, oh, like, weed solves all of my problems. And then the problems are still there because I'm not dealing with them. And then my life got worse because of what weed did to me in my situation. And then the high, I mean, I was smoking like a quarter ounce of weed a day. So it's like I couldn't smoke that much more realistically, if you think about it, without like sincerely destroying my lungs. I mean, because then the way you did it increased. You go from like smoking out of a little bowl to like a bubbler. Then you're just ripping bong hits all day. You know what I mean? To get as high as possible. And then that's what led to me again having these panic attacks, and then like finding a new way to numb myself, which was opiates. So I think that's why the controversy exists. Is like there's people that can recreationally use it that don't always go into harder drugs, but most people that I know,
That's the controversy. Yeah,
yeah,
people are saying, "Well, I can smoke weed, and I'm not doing heroin. I'm not doing smoking crack or whatever."
right.
I,
But
I think. I,
but
I
weed's
think like
involved in every addict story, I think, or most addict stories somehow, right?
Yeah, I also think, like, people also say, like, what are the consequences of me smoking weed? I'm fat and I like watching the X Files, man, or like whatever. Like they're like, I like cupcakes, man. It's no big deal. And it's like that's true. Like most people don't wind up homeless or sucking dick, against their will to support their weed habit. But what I always say is, it's like if you're super happy in your stoner lifestyle. If that is enough, then God bless. You know what I mean? If that's enough. I know for me, there was a definite ceiling, a bubble. I could not do anything more than what I was doing. And also, when I was smoking weed, I was barely remembering to pay bills.
Right.
I was not connected. I'm very connected to a lot of people right now. And it's one of the reasons is because I need it to stimulate my brain. You know, the connection stimulates my brain, it stimulates my soul. Weed covered all those bases, but not in a in-depth enough way to give me real satisfaction. And so what I'm saying is if you're out there and you're some stoner and you're like, who are these nerds? Um, Ask yourself, are you satisfied with your stoner life? And if you are, I say God bless you. And if you're not, then I would say what Doug said, you know, see what it is without the crutch, and see what you can add.
Right. And I think a lot of times people think it's something else. Like they think it's their circumstances in their life that are making their life worse, or they think it's like a relationship. But really, like the main thing could be the weed, because the weed could be making you more anxious long term. It could be limiting you in some way. It could be making you more irritable or whatever the case may be. But you don't really know until you like remove it. So I think like, knowing what I know now, if I were in a place where I was unhappy and I couldn't figure out why I was unhappy, I would like literally like write down like, okay, like what am I doing on a daily basis? Like who do I spend time with? What are my like behaviors like? And then you try to figure out like, oh, like maybe this is causing it, maybe that's causing it. But I agree with you in that if somebody's happy, like my message isn't to tell people to stop living a life that they're happy with. My message is to stop making these blanket statements that weed's this safe drug to use, because it's not. And I think that there's a big movement in the recovery movement for harm reduction as well with it. And I think that that's a scary thing too, because now you're, in my opinion, using another addictive substance to replace another addictive substance. And if you're an addict and your mind is already messed up and you don't have the ability to deal with life and trauma and stuff, that's a very, very slippery slope, especially given the toxicity of today's weed compared to 20 years ago.
I think I think our messages are very similar, but also a little bit different. And I don't disagree with you. It's more like as a drug addict, you know, I'm a drug addict in recovery, but
Right.
as a drug addict, I hate being told what to do. I
Yeah.
hate somebody saying, no, 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 no. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
I don't
Yeah.
want to fucking hear about it. Like, and I don't think you're wrong. I want to give, and all the heroin addicts out there that are just smoking weed and their life is so much better. And I'll speak for Doug. We salute you. We salute
Yeah.
you. And the
Right.
Dopey has two mottos. Motto one is love is the answer, and motto two is let your freak flag fly. And for me, it's like my life is a billion times better in abstinence. And like, I think you know, that's my life. And I have a spiritual program and I have a program of recovery and I have stuff I love to do. I can't say that's what is best for everybody. It's
No.
just, you know, that's all.
Well, and I agree with you. And I guess my delivery, my intention isn't to tell people what to do. I guess my passion also comes from, I've coached and trained and mentored several young adult males who weed has caused psychological problems. They've ended up in bouts of psychosis due to them thinking that weed was this safe substance to use. So I have a bias towards that. But again, like if you're like, yeah, one of my friends went from like shooting heroin every day and now they're, legally and recreationally using weed and it's helping their life. I mean, sure, what am I going to say to that? I mean, I think obviously I'm not going to tell them to stop doing that, but my message is more, it revolves around like having the
Potential.
potential and like having the self-awareness and being brutally honest with yourself. Like, are you actually happy? Are you justifying your happiness because of the limiting beliefs that you think you may have? You know what I mean?
Well, last night, right, I was super stressed out. Um, I went to Manhattan. I did a bunch of shit. It was a long day. I had to stay up late and pick up my 14-year-old from her friend's house, and I was stressed out. And you know, Doug and I I make this podcast, and Doug once in a while comes on the podcast and does a thing we call the Dopey Fitness Challenge. And part of the Dopey Fitness Challenge is nutrition and diet and stuff. And I find that when I get really stressed, I go crazy eating chocolate chips and yogurt pops and fucking these cookies and like and milk. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
I eat for relief. You know what I mean? And I it's like it's my that's what I did last night, and I knew um this was not what I wanted to be doing. I want to wake up in the morning and be like, I didn't do that last night. You know what I mean? I'm less grotesque and fat because I didn't do that last night, but I did. You know, and I think it's like it's not an easy life to navigate without some kind of vice. Um, and I feel for stoners because my stonerdom has just kind of become eating and like whatever jealousy and lust and other character defects.
Yeah, and I think like two things can be true, right? Like I think that life can be challenging and it can be easy to want to like numb with certain things and like there's you have to have compassion for people that fall into that, right? While also saying not everybody has to deal with life's challenges by using substances. Because I think what happens is a lot of people, I mean, the word addict, and I'm sure we'll disagree on this. I don't have an issue with the word addict. I think that the problem becomes there's just this negative connotation or association with the word addict that I think in our minds at times you th- I've heard people think they're going to be limited in life because of them being an addict. When really, I think being an addict is a great superpower because think about like all the work. Like I know for me, like all the work that I put into like finding the drugs I needed for the day. Like I think transition to like you and I talk a lot about chasing down guests. Like our ability to like just be relentless about things for the podcast or I sold a bunch of drugs growing up and that allowed me to you know understand what it was like to some level in running a business and building customer relationships and stuff like that. And so I have an issue with the word at times because I have heard people that I know are super smart, super talented, super gifted. They just got themselves in a mess with addiction. They're now just happy with just only going to meetings and then like their whole goal is just to stay sober and that's it. When I'm like, dude, you're so smart, you're so talented, like chase after this. And I'm almost wondering, does their mind limit them because they think because they're an addict that they're somehow not going to be able to reach their full potential? Does that make sense?
Right there. I mean, but I think it makes sense. But I think the thing that we land on is like I think it's very important to consider everybody's goals are different. Everybody's dreams are different. Everybody's version of success is different.
Sure.
Everybody's version of enough is different, you know, and it's a slippery slope. And I don't know. It's all about love and compassion. If somebody's unhappy with their shit, like I need help. Like I don't. It's like it doesn't go both ways for me. Like that, I can stuff my face at night and then the next day crave to not do it. If I was like I'm happy with how I am, then good. But
Right.
I'm not happy with how I am. And I think somebody who's happy with their life and their recovery, um, and they're not climbing mountains or having a six pack or having a great podcast or having a great business and they're satisfied with their life. Listen, satisfaction is like incredible. If you're satisfied with your life, it's like I don't think you need more. I think if you're happy with what you have, it's amazing. And as far as addict versus no addict, it's just a word. Chris used to always say he was so glad he was an addict because he found all this work
Hmm.
to do on himself. And he was so happy he wasn't, really mentally ill or totally spiritually bankrupt or whatever. And he was just an addict. But
Right.
because he died from this disorder or affliction, whatever you want to call it, it just reminds me that you have to keep working. You know what I mean? You can be grateful that you're an addict and grateful that you're in recovery or not be comfortable with the term, but no matter what, it requires maintenance of a life.
Right. And I think the main thing I think it comes back to and again, just I think it's like the theme of our conversation is just self-awareness and intentionality and like asking yourself these harder questions because you're right. Like, I don't think everybody has to have a six pack. I don't think everybody has to start a podcast or have
Yeah,
this.
please, and I'm going to say this: don't start a podcast. There's too many podcasts
So,
already.
man,
Just don't do one.
but I do think that, again, two things can be true. You
I
don't
can't
have
handle the competition,
to.
frankly. I can't handle the idea of another fucking podcast I have to worry about out there. Anyway, keep going. I'm sorry.
No, it's okay. I think two things can be true. You can. It's okay to not have the same like massive dreams or big dreams as other people you may know or people you see on the internet. I also think that what else can be true is I think in my opinion in life, in order to be happy, you have to ask yourself some hard questions, and that is the key to happiness. Like if you just are like kind of just passively going through life, I don't think that you're going to be truly happy because you're not even going to know who you truly are, what you truly like, how your relationships are impacting you, how your habits are impacting you. So in the context of happiness, I think the only way to really get there is to really get to know yourself. You know what
What
I
about
mean?
this? Do you see how my hair is just white here? Like I'm like, it's like, what the fuck is that? Do I mean like if you
It's
are me,
wisdom. It's wisdom.
would you shave this and get one of those things that connects like this? Because this is all brown.
I think you should grow
You
like a
see,
Fu
this
Manchu
is
for
all brown, and then it's
Dopey.
white. I could have one of those, yeah, like a sea captain thing. No,
Clip this. Dopey Nation poll: should Dave grow a Fu Manchu for DopeyCon?
I feel like it was just one of these things. Just one of these things. But I think we covered a lot of really good stuff. And what's your closing thought, Mr. Bobst?
So
What didn't we cover? Do you think
well,
we fucked this up?
I think I gave three gifts. I'll give two more that are on the top of my head, off the top of my head. Um, the fourth gift is it allowed me to spend time with better people. Like I was spending time with people that, and they weren't bad people, but they were in a way influencing me subconsciously or indirectly to make poor decisions in my life because of my addiction to the lifestyle that I talked about earlier. And these kids were like picking on me. I was like, being bullied and joked about a lot. And when I gave up that lifestyle, I started to spend time with people that were actually interested in helping me better myself, that were interested in supporting, and like loving and supporting me for who I was, which is a massive gift in my life because I think relationships are everything. Um, the fifth point that comes to mind
Gift.
is
Fifth gift.
the fifth gift that comes to mind is I felt like my brain started to heal a bit. And I don't know
Mm,
exactly what goes on neurologically, but you hear a lot. Like one of the most common pushbacks, at least for me growing up with weed, was people were like, it rots your brain. Like it
mm,
destroys brain cells, right?
mm-hmm.
And I was like, oh, like I'm going to be like this the rest of my life because my brain cells are already gone. I found for me that once I stopped to smoke, my brain started to heal itself. My memory got better. I started to be able to think deeper. I started to like get better with managing my emotions. I felt like I became more mature. Um, and I started to think differently. Right. So I think my brain just through neuroplasticity or whatever, like just began to heal itself. So in my experience, it was definitely a misconception that your brain is done forever when you smoke. And that was a big thing for me because I again, the reason I talk about the limiting stuff is because I was that same person. I was the person that thought I was going to be limited for the rest of my life because I was a drug addict. I thought I was going to be limited for the rest of my life because I had destroyed my brain, in my opinion, at the time with things like weed. And I was like, well, I'm not going to be able to do anything else anyway because I've already messed up so much that this is the life I'm supposed to live. And so I speak from experience. I speak from like walking in that same person's shoes of what I described earlier. It's not a me of standing at the top of a mountain and shouting down at somebody. It's like, no, like
You've been there.
I've been there. You know what I mean?
Definitely. And I think I love that you did the five gifts. Do you feel like you can breathe easy now that it's like we said we're going to do five gifts? If we don't do five gifts, then what kind of bullshit YouTube video is this? And Doug, as a master YouTube creator, can this video do what your other big videos did? Is it possible?
I think anything's possible. We'll see. But no, my point is, I know I would have gotten a text from you. I'm like, dude, we only covered 3 gifts. What are we gonna do? And I'd be like,
You think so?
yeah, because I think we talked about 5 at the beginning, and then you some. So I just was trying to make sure that we're all peachy here.
Listen, I think you dotted your I's and crossed your T's, and I think we put out a lot of really fun, positive shit around to smoke or not to smoke. That is the question. And I've always had a reservation for weed. I've always had a reservation for weed.
Because of your own experience, or just watching other people with it?
No, my own experience. I always figured one day I would get back to smoking weed, and only I would say this year. Like I always imagined one day I'd be an old man who would smoke bong hits and listen to the Allman Brothers. I always thought of myself, 20 years down the line, whatever, 25, whatever. But there's a guy at my meeting who's, I want to say he's 70. Wow. And he had 30 years sober, and then he went out and drank for a year because he thought he could.
Right.
And he said the shame it caused him with his family, he said, was the most demoralizing thing that he had ever faced, because he had been a sober person for so long. And it really kind of changed my view, because life is not your own. Life is your community. Life is your family. Life is your children. Life is your people. If I was not in this family, maybe I could take my reservation and run. But being a part of a family, smoking, I mean, like, what am I, smoking bong hits on the porch, and my wife comes home and she's like, what the fuck are you doing? And my kids are like, Daddy, why are you fucking smoking weed? Like, and also the greatest thing for me that I always talk about is that I feel high anyway. Like I don't know, like I can access the feeling of weed right now. I can feel it. I smoked enough weed. I can feel it in my brain no matter what.
Do you think it's because you're so, and you might think this is too like woo woo or to me, like trying to like dissect who you are as a person, but do you think the reason that you feel that way is you're so like tapped into your mission and like what you're doing in life? Because when I talk to you, like I'm not just saying this just to like, because I'm live with you on your show. I'm saying this because I've known you for years. We talk a lot. You're so committed to your mission with Dopey. Like you love it, and you like have this deep emotional connection to the listeners, to the guests. I mean, you care so much about it that you think that just is because that's so strong that gives you this a similar like high type feeling.
I don't know. I think it was because I think mostly it's because when I became a real person, like when I became a man, being a stoner was a huge part of it. It was
right.
Like it was part of the vision of how I wanted my life to be. And I go, it's like music. It's like when you get older, you probably find that you still listen to the music you listened to then. Fashion. It's like, why aren't bootcut corduroys like big in fashion, when to me they're the greatest pants that were ever invented? You know what I mean? Like I dress exactly the same way that I ever dressed, like basketball shorts and like whatever. It's like you have a vision of what you think things should be like. Like I like music that has, an electric piano, an organ, and a clavinet. It doesn't matter. Like it's just in my brain. I believe in it. And I think weed and that stony vibe is right there. But I mean, I would say not smoking weed saved my life too.
It's a great way to close, huh?
That was my plan. Yeah. Thank you, Doug. This was a lot of fun. We should do this more often.
Always. Yeah, for sure.
And we have to do a new Dopey Fitness Challenge, so get ready.
I will.
All right. Thanks, man. Appreciate it. Do you think this is going to go viral, by the way? We think we can hit some views on this thing?
I think it'll do okay. I mean,
what about your positivity and all that stuff?
I'm trying to maintain your level of sanity and happiness, so that if I tell you it's going to go viral and it doesn't, that
I'll blame you.
Exactly.
I think that's fair. Thank you.
You got it.
Yeah.